owners for the Steelers, are now co-owners of the Browns. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the AFC's oldest franchise, has been owned by the Rooney family since its inception in 1933. Dan Rooney, the Steelers' second owner, is remembered as much for his strong advocacy for equality of opportunity for both minorities and women as he is for the franchise's 6 Super Bowl rings. Much of his storied life is chronicled in the new book, A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule, written by his son Jim Rooney. More than a biography or a profile, the book traces the building of a prestigious franchise in the NFL, the dynasty of the Steelers in the 1970s. Rooney's decades of work to support reconciliation in Northern Ireland, which led to him becoming U.S. ambassador to Ireland in 2009, and the Rooney Rule, an NFL policy since 2003 that requires teams to interview a diverse slate of candidates for head coaching jobs. Today, we'll talk with Mr. Rooney about his father's life and commitment to diversity and inclusion. Now, joining Mr. Rooney on stage is Dee Haslam, co-owner of the Cleveland Browns and Major League Soccer's Columbus Crew. She is one of 8 women with primary ownership of an NFL team and is the first woman to be on Major League Soccer's Board of Governors. A University of Tennessee graduate, Ms. Haslam began her career in the television business working for her father, Ross Bagwell. In 1999, she and partner Rob Lundgren took over Bagwell Entertainment and renamed it River Media, RIVR, a successful company whose productions include the well-known Trading Spaces and Whale Wars, among other shows. I love those shows, Dee. Today, she's actively involved in both franchises and their respective philanthropic and community efforts. Her work helped earn Browns ownership the Tank Younger Award from the Fritz Pollard Alliance, given to her for having built one of the most diverse front offices in all of sports. Esteemed guests, members, friends of the City Club, would you please join me in welcoming to our stage Dee Haslam and Jim Rooney. Now, the book you see there on the table was released today. I think you'd find it an interesting read. Jim tells me he designed it with 4 different narratives because his dad did accomplish just so much. And to be honest, it reads pretty much like 4 shorter volumes. For much of the conversation, we'll deal directly with the implementation of the Rooney Rule, diversity in and out of the front office, its impact on the NFL of today. But there's a lot more in the text. A lot more is in that text. For instance, those of you who are local may be surprised to learn just how much Dan Rooney valued and treasured the Cleveland Browns. And that's where I'd like to start today, Jim, because as far back as the 1950s, these 2 storied franchises needed each other as rivals, as business partners. It was a far less lucrative NFL back then.
Right. So, Rick, thank you, and Dee, thank you so much for hosting me here in Cleveland. So it's wonderful to be in Cleveland. Cleveland is my second home, so I went to Gilmore Academy and grew up in this town, and it's always wonderful to be back. So there's many chapters to this story and this rivalry, but on sort of the ownership side, it starts with Paul Brown bringing this great team into the NFL, and the Steelers were horrible back then, and not too many people went to games in Pittsburgh. So when the Steelers would play the Browns, that was our best sellout of the year. We would get the most fans to come back in the early 50s because of the great Browns team. You go through the later years, and we worked together on so many different things throughout those years. I talk about that in the book some. And then Dee and Jimmy came along and really helped our family at a time when we were at a crossroads from an ownership standpoint, and their investment and their partnership meant a tremendous amount to us at a really critical time. And now they're taking the Browns. I hope they take them to the point where we can get back to that rivalry as much as after everyone buys my book, then they can hate the Steelers.
Skip ahead for me to 1999, Browns 2.0. People don't realize how much your dad was instrumental in making sure that this city got this team back where it belonged.
Right, and I think it goes to a couple of things. I mean, generally, my father always believed that people in Pittsburgh and then getting to know Cleveland had this special quality, this ability to sort of combine toughness and kindness in a way that I think is uncommon. And I don't know that the rest of the world does that as well as these 2 towns do. And that was something my father talked about because he was at high school football games in Mayfield and Independence and all over this region. And so when the Browns were about to leave, the vote came up, and my father said, the quote is, "I'm for Cleveland," and so he stood up and really felt that it was important that we make this commitment to these fans that have been so loyal, that have had this fervor and love for this team, that this is basically the birthplace of football, between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and then went on to sort of, orchestrate, making sure we got a team back. And actually, Roger Goodell, who's now commissioner, was the league official who was assigned to the sort of day-to-day tasks. So my father and Roger worked with the city and the county and the state to make sure the stadium got built. They negotiated with Al Lerner, and the Lerners came in and brought the team back. So sort of every part of that process, from them leaving until we launched the new Browns, my father was heavily involved in that.
Dee, the current leadership at the Browns, you owe a lot of the management style you have to lessons learned at the feet of Dan Rooney.
That's true. I mean, Dan, the entire Rooney family they're such a great family, and we were fortunate enough to spend some time with them 4 years, and fantastic organization, and just what you learn from them is just high level of integrity, just really good people. And Dan, he shot you straight on everything that came down when we decided. A funny story, when we got the Browns, of course, we had to call the Rooney family and say, we're purchasing the Browns. We're not going to be part of the Steelers. And he said, well, did you have to buy the Browns? It was like, could you have bought any other team in the country? Did it have to be the Browns? Did you know that?
I didn't know.
Yeah. And so, and that's true. I mean, it's kind of one of their biggest rivals, and of course, part of the organization, and then jump ship to the Browns from their viewpoint.
His influence certainly felt with these two franchises, but his influence is felt league-wide. And some of the things that he did in Pittsburgh and around the NFL are things that you have pushed for. For instance, the Browns are very community-oriented. The push you have for education, that all stems back?
Yeah, the Rooney family sets a high bar in all of the NFL. I mean, it obviously is one of the most respected families in the organization, and they do set the pace for giving back and being part of the community and caring about everything about the community. Your mom and dad have just been instrumental in a lot of initiatives in Pittsburgh, and you can feel it as part of the club. I think it works for NFL franchises to be very committed to the community, and we hope to do the same thing and try every day to see how we can give back to Cleveland and do a great job.
Your dad had what amounted to a manifesto. This is the way each person in the Steelers organization should do their job. This is what their duties were. This is how they better handle it. And if they wavered, they walked.
Well, my father was very clear with things, but he was patient with people. I don't want it to come across that, if you spilled some water on the furniture that you
miss
were
a
gone.
field goal.
He had a tremendous amount of patience and actually believed in developing folks. But if he felt that you weren't aligned with bringing us to the he talked about greatness all the time, and he never talked about winning the next game. He had this expectation that we should be great in everything we do, whether it was coaching or any other aspect of the organization, and that's really what he tried to get folks to focus on is, what are you doing to enhance that sort of pursuit of greatness? And if he didn't feel you were doing that, he absolutely, would create that separation. But I think he also had a lot of patience for one to find their way to that path.
In the book, he writes about treating the team like an orchestra. You want everybody pulling in the same direction. You want the music to flow wonderfully. He tried to do that for the NFL as well, getting the league to do things that he felt were best for the league, even to the detriment of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, in the short term, some of those things might have been detriment to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but a lot of things that he did were working with the Maras and the Hallases and the McCaskies, the folks in Philadelphia. If we didn't have the revenue sharing, if we didn't have the partnerships that we have, my father always believed that there was no way that Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Baltimore could compete with Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. So he was constantly working with them to build those partnerships. So yes, there were some choices made that maybe he put the Steelers on the back burner, but he understood that a strong league certainly benefited the Steelers in a way that a weak league would be very difficult for us to compete in.
And you wrote that he watched specifically how the Giants, the Bears, the Packers, and the Browns, before they were part of the league, had been winners. What their offices did, what their coaches did, how they handled their players, all of that he wanted to emulate to create what became a great franchise, but at the time was not.
Well, and absolutely, and probably the biggest step in that was hiring Chuck Noll, who was an acolyte of Paul Brown, and was a native of the east side of Cleveland, went to Benedictine High School, and then came in and helped the Steelers, well, really led the Steelers to 4 Super Bowl championships. I always say that the most important person in Steeler history is Chuck Noll, and he's from Cleveland. So, Chuck transformed us from losers to winners, and, can't say enough about Chuck Noll and what he learned here in Cleveland, both his value system as well as from a football standpoint from Paul Brown.
Dee, do you feel like that extends to a city, that the football team really needs to be a leader to the people who pull for it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you just have to, you're part of the fiber. I mean, we've talked a lot about how we are just keepers of the franchise. I mean, it belongs to the people of Northeast Ohio. And you can feel that when you're here, how important it is. And our job is also to give back as much as possible. I was going to comment a little bit on Dan Rooney's NFL admiration of the shield. He taught us and talked a lot about how to protect the shield and how important it is. The NFL is 100 years old. It took a lot of people behind the scenes to move, and it started and stopped lots of times along that 100-year journey. And I think that Dan and your grandfather, of course, and then Dan came along and just kind of kept it going. And so the importance of the shield has this strong history of men and women that were committed to making the game what it is today.
There's a comment in the book about how he fought, not that it should be Denver versus Cleveland or Baltimore versus New York, but he thought sometimes it was the NFL versus the NBA versus Major League Baseball versus the NHL. He really did, as you said, fight to protect that shield. That's the way he wanted to be known.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he had grown up when football was, a sandlot sort of activity, and sort of came of age as television was coming about, and with Commissioner Rozelle and Wellington Mara, so many folks that they did some of the things that Dee said, where now we're beyond certainly what my grandfather and my father would have ever imagined, back in the 50s this would be.
We wanted to talk a lot about diversity and the Rooney Rule. It's a National League policy that requires league teams to interview ethnic minority candidates for head coaching and senior football operations jobs. First implemented in 2003, championed and, of course, named after the Steelers' late chairman, variations of the rule are now used in many other industries as well. Someone characterized it as stemming from his religious upbringing, from his involvement in the civil rights movement, from just wanting to bring people together. Where do you think it came from?
Well, I think it was something that was important to my family before my father. My grandfather promoted the first open heavyweight championship between 2 African Americans, Jersey Joe Wolcott and Ezra Charles, in 1955. So that foundation had been laid. It was something that was important. And then, my father really felt he could implement it into the Steelers, what he would have called integration into the Steelers. We hired a scout, one of the first African-American scouts, named Bill Nunn, in 1968. And from 1969 to 76, we drafted more players from HBCUs than any other team, and then that team went on to win 4 Super Bowl championships in 6 years. So it was something that was I guess, a natural part of his legacy, and but something he really felt was important to do. And then he believed it would create the competitive advantage that it did.
And you pointed out in the book that on the Super Bowl teams, you did have players from the historically black colleges. You had players from Big Ten schools. You had a lot of kids from Ohio on the team as well. Jack Lambert, of course. There were so many things that were designed to build a good football team, but he also wanted to design a good look at America. He brought people in on purpose because they were so different.
Right. I talk about it in that case. We also talk about his time in Ireland, and in Ireland you had this sort of major conflict that we understand as Catholics and Protestants, but it really was playing out in a much more complex way in housing, in voting, in workers' rights, and and my father always worked in every situation he was involved in, also with the players union, to try and bring people together. He really felt that you could have strong differences with someone, but there was no reason not to have some type of dialogue and some way to communicate with them. So what you saw on the field was sort of an extension of I think, one of his major beliefs, which was there's always a way to work something out with someone else.
The Browns certainly bought in. We've had coaches, Jackson, Cornell, who were African-American. It really does enter into your psyche, not just because there's a rule, but you wanted to give people a fair shake.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, of course, Dan Rooney has had such a powerful impact on the NFL, and now it goes through corporate America, which is just, the impact is long lasting. But it's the right thing to do, and it's a good thing to do. Your organization is going to be better. Your culture is going to be better. It's a priority within our organization, and we do it and we put it in our companies as well.
It's interesting, though, when we look at 2019, we have 4 coaches of color in the NFL, the lowest number since the Rooney Rule went in. 3 African Americans in Pittsburgh and Miami and Los Angeles, and Rivera and Charlotte. Is it disappointing that it's not gone further than where we are?
Well, look, I think with diversity, numbers are important. But if you look at, from 1920 to 2003, you had 7 minority hires, and then since 2003, since the Rooney Rule, along with general managers, you have 30. So I think my father, would believe that there has been progress. He also was always committed to the long run. He understood that any of these initiatives, whether it was the Rooney Rule, the peace process in Ireland, that if you're going to make major changes, it's going to take a long time to really establish them. So he would always be rigorous. He would want us to be pushing the boundaries and finding out, are there new best practices that we should be considering? Is there more knowledge out there? Is there some way you can improve it? But he also had an appreciation that if you're going to make real substantial change, that's going to take a long time.
Dee, do you think it's sometimes the makeup of a city that determines who they want to bring in as the coach? We look right now at Miami. They're like the 50th most diverse city. Cleveland and Pittsburgh, oddly enough, are almost back-to-back at 56 and 58. Does it matter what the populace is when you're looking? And I know you've only done it for the one team, but
I haven't ever thought of that. I mean, that's kind of an interesting thought, but no, I don't think so. I mean, I think the NFL is actively developing minority coaches. I mean, that is a priority within the NFL. We work really hard at it, and they have programs that you go into, and they train for leadership, and I think it's something that we're going to continue to work really hard on. It's not something we take lightly. It's a priority. It's at the top of the list, and we're going to continue to work really hard on it. And as an organization, we're going to continue to work hard on it too.
Next step for a lot of people is the inclusion of LGBT players. Not that there aren't any now, it's just that they aren't spoken of. We don't necessarily know who they are. The league hasn't followed where baseball is, where they talk to all of their players coming through the minors about it in the beginning of the season. Is that something the NFL needs to maybe address a little bit differently? Have you had owners' conversations about that?
We haven't had a lot of conversation about it, so I think that's something that will evolve. I think as other sports teams evolve, I think that's something that will be obviously a conversation within the organization, and for the players to feel comfortable and welcomed, and I think that is something, that it's like a family in that locker room, and they take care of each other. So I think in a lot of cases it kind of works out that the players feel pretty comfortable in the locker room because they care about each other as people.
Rick, one thing on the league that I do feel very good about right now as it relates to diversity is Dee, is Katie Brown Blackburn in Cincinnati, is Gail Benson in New Orleans, Kim Peluga up in Buffalo, obviously Martha Ford, although she's been around a little longer than the rest of us. I think she's 92 running the Lions.
Fantastic, yes.
But the generation before, my mother had influence. Mrs. McCaskey had influence, but it was much quieter. It was not that they were at the table in the same way that Dee and some of the other folks are. So, you had my father, I believe, and I hope took a leadership position. But now I think that you have a situation where you're getting a situation where you're going to have a mass, a much larger group of people being able to speak to these issues, speak from an experience that my father certainly never could have. So I'm excited for the NFL from that standpoint, and Dee has been very much a leader in that, since she's been involved with the Browns. So I think we have a big asset there, not only just with Dee, which is great, but also with the fact that we've made that transition to having women really having a significant voice in the owner's room that they never did before.
Don't underestimate your mother. What she had. She has a great deal of influence.
While we're talking about women, there's only one female official in the league right now. Is that something else that should be addressed?
Yeah, I think it'll evolve too. I think that's another one of those things that you put a priority on, and it's training and development, and women wanting to be part of it and stepping up and doing it. I think you'll see it evolve and happen.
You mentioned your dad didn't have the opportunity to talk about homosexual players in the league, but I bet he'd have spoken out on Colin Kaepernick. And I bring that up because it's topical again. This week we learned that Colin has a private workout scheduled for Saturday. 10 teams now promised to send people there. Would Dan Rooney have spoken out against this blackballing or this? There's not a ban. Nobody said you can't hire him, but nobody has over 3 seasons.
Well, that's a hard question for me to answer. My father's not with us, so I don't want to put words into his mouth with him not being here. I do know that, my father was always willing to step up in difficult situations, but he also was committed to any type of change, that initiative that he got involved with was always looking at the long term. So, I don't know exactly how that relates, but I know that was sort of his mindset, and I talk about that in the book, about how he stepped up. But when he stepped up, it was quieter. It was about creating processes and procedures that would change things. So that's sort of how he embraced change and took change on. I really can't speak beyond that, what he might do.
I'm going to go back to the time when that happened after the president came out with his comments about SOB ought to be fired, et cetera. The Green Bay Packers issued a statement then, which I'll read. This is from September of 2017. It says, the NFL family is one of the most diverse communities in the world. Just look around. The eclectic group of players that you root for, the coaches you admire, the people you sit next to in the stands, those high-fiving on military bases, fans at the sports bar or during tailgate parties. We all come from different walks of life and have unique backgrounds and stories. A real kumbaya moment there, Dee. But the NFL we live in today, top to bottom, we are very, very different people. Do you want the football team to reflect the fact that we have high dollar and low dollar, black and white people of all religions and ethnicities that love Cleveland Browns football or Pittsburgh Steelers football?
I mean, I think that's the point. It's the NFL or sports in general, the most unifying thing you can be. It doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, or what you believe, or your definitely not your political beliefs, but it's really all about rooting for a team that means so much to a community. It really does bring everybody together. You'll see that tonight. You'll have Steelers fans and Browns fans, but they're united on
sharing
together
a roll, but
for
not
this
a
team.
beer,
And
right?
it is kind of a nice break from all the really hard stuff in life to cheer on your team that stands for your community. So I think it's very reflective of the community. I mean, we're, the Cleveland Browns fan, every NFL team argues they have the best fans out there. We really think we have a unique fan base that loves football.
Mm-hmm. When you think about, no owner has said, I'm not going to hire this guy, Kaepernick, but, you have a quarterback worth keeping now. You have a quarterback worth keeping now. I figure like somebody would
We
have
hope
said.
we have 2.
You hope, yes. Well, actually 3. We've played 3 this year.
I think a team will definitely pick him up if it fits in within their team and he's a good player. I mean, you want to win, get football games.
Right.
And I don't know if you noticed, but you do everything you can to win a football game, and you get the best players you can get, and you come up with the best scheme. And I think this is part of it. I think it's all about getting the best players on there. So I absolutely think he has an opportunity if he's playing well. I don't know. I'm not a good scout on the ability to play football or not.
When we look at where the Browns are now compared to when you first came in, compared to when they came back in 1999, you've got to be proud of this franchise and the way this community embraces it and they embrace the town.
Extremely proud of it. Extremely proud of what the Browns stand for in Cleveland. It's really important whether we win or lose. You know, it really makes a difference in this community. Really extremely appreciative of the support that the fans give the team. I mean, these are young men out there fighting really hard to win a game, and I really appreciate the support of the fans of all the people. I mean, they care deeply for Cleveland and to win for Cleveland. So yes, I'm excited. I'm so excited about tonight.
Yeah. Do they come up to you? Do they come up to you? Do they talk to you? Do they give you suggestions? They say, you know, do or do not play Nick Chubb?
They don't to me, so they don't usually talk to me about that kind of stuff. But, you know, I'm more, you know, the encourager, the mom, make everybody feel okay. They bring out the chicken soup. I'm really...
That's the job. Okay.
That's my job.
Okay, thank you. I'm Rick Jackson. Today we are at the Westfield Insurance Studio Theater, the Idea Center, listening to a special City Club forum with Cleveland Browns co-owner Dee Haslam and Jim Rooney, author of A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. We're about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, those of you joining us via our live stream. If you have a question, please form a line. We have microphones here in the studio on both sides. Our team members and staff members are standing there. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club. Our staff will try and work it into the program. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point so we can get to as many as possible. We see folks lining up already because they want to talk to these two fantastic guests. May we have the first question, please?
Yeah, thank you both for being here. 20-year resident of Cleveland, grew up in Pittsburgh, so I brought my terrible towel. As you think about the Rooney Rule, this certainly was less about checking a box and more about a culture change. So with your respective organizations, have you seen where that has trickled down into some of the other areas of the organization or your work within the community?
Dee, why don't you go first?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very much part of our organization, and we talk about it. You know, do we have a diverse candidate for that position? And if we don't, why not? And I think it's really important. I think everybody is well aware of it. We have a very diverse office, and it really does, the culture of it, it does make a huge difference in the culture.
So I think on, one of the things my father was sort of known for that you can really put your finger on, I hope there's several, but was hiring. And, you know, in the story of Mike Tomlin's hire really spells out the spirit of the Rooney Rule, because we had actually, completed the Rooney Rule requirement with the interview of Coach Ron Rivera, who is, now the coach of the Carolina Panthers. But we started with, I believe it's 37 candidates, went down to 12, went down to 4, and then picked Mike. And my father always believed that he had great respect for the media, but that you don't let the media pick your starting quarterback. You don't worry if you're going to get a bad story on Monday because this coach went to that team or that coach went to that team. That when you're doing this, when you're involved in a process that is this significant, that you take your time, that you're deliberate, and that's where diversity really fits in. And Tony Dungy, talked about the spirit of the Rooney Rule, and that hire was sort of, totally consistent with what he tried to do. That process was what he also used, fundamentally with Bill Cowher, and a similar process with Chuck Noll. So the idea of slowing it down and then bringing diverse candidates into the fold, I think really allows you to get a stronger sense of how they're going to fit into your culture, how they're going to enhance your culture, and make those decisions from that standpoint rather than sort of, just do it sort of off the bat.
3 coaches in 50 years. I think the plan worked. Let's go to the other side of the studio here.
What are your thoughts about the prospect of the NFL establishing a team in London? Do you think that's practical, doable, and how high an agenda item is it for the league and the other owners?
I mean, I do think it's a possibility. I mean, it obviously has been talked about. When you go over to London, it's in a different kind of experience. The fans don't necessarily wear the teams that are playing. They wear their jerseys that the team they've associated with. So it's more of a this festive kind of atmosphere. It's not that, the competition like we have here. It's just a different atmosphere. It's a lot of fun, and we enjoyed our time over there. I think it's a discussion. I don't think there's been a decision made, but I do think there's an opportunity there, and the fans seem to love it.
I think that's the perfect answer. I mean, that's where the NFL stands right now.
What about the logistical and practical challenges of it, though?
I mean, there's the logistic challenges when we fly across to the West Coast to play out there. I mean, it's logistic. There's lots of logistics. No matter where we travel, there's a lot of people that we travel. So I think it's just an hour. The hours that are different, but it's still the same amount of work to get over there that it is to go to the West Coast.
Would you vote for it if it was on the agenda?
I hadn't thought about it yet. I think it would depend on who it is and what it means and what it looks like. It's kind of a puzzle. It hadn't come up to talk about yet, so I don't know.
If I can follow Tom's question, would you think the same thing about Mexico City?
I think there's opportunity there too. I think that's a possibility. I think London's probably a little further out, closer to that reality, but I don't know that it would be impossible to do that either. It's a little closer.
Yeah, for certain teams, it's a lot closer.
Now, I'll get in a little trouble for saying this, but the Steelers are the second most popular team in Mexico, so I'm happy with how things are.
You're good with that one. Okay. Yes.
So I have a question regarding, there was a New York Times article yesterday, I believe, about the concern of players' health care. And as a business operation, and you providing health care for your players and sacrificing their time on the field for their personal health and well-being, could you address some of the personal health care as a business, the challenges you're facing?
Well, the Players Association kind of drives all of that. So I did not read the article, so I don't really know what it said. So I'm a little bit at a disadvantage, but there's a lot of different factors that go into that, and the Players Association is heavily involved in that.
How much do the owners and the Players Association agree on things? I mean, we hear about the confrontations.
Look, the health and well-being of the players is really important. You don't have a game without it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you've seen the changes in the rules for safety, which has frustrated a lot of fans. Mm-hmm. But you got to take care of the players, and you got to take care of the quarterback. And so the safety rules are in place, and we continue to work on science for helmets that will impact. The military will make a difference in so many other people's lives with the technology we continue to work out. I think it's really important, and I think we can impact other sports and other uses by really spending time on that science. So it's really important part of what we do.
Interesting. You talk about other sports. Do you have a lot of conversations with hockey, with baseball, with basketball?
I think the technology is one of those things that there's a lot of conversation about. And there's a group of doctors that work continually on the health and safety of these players and looking at turning over every rock and looking at every aspect to make sure we do everything correctly to make it as healthy and safe as possible.
Thanks.
We have a question from Twitter. How do players discuss the Rooney Rule and the way the NFL is currently handling diversity and inclusion? What do players tell you that they want and care about?
So, I remember my grandfather, who started the Steelers in 1932. I said I was 15, 16 years old, made some quip about these players today, and this was 40 years ago. And he said, the players today are not that much different than the players were in 1932. And I think that is always the case. You have a group of, 60 people from all over the country and now to some degree all over the world, and you have a whole lot more opinions than folks think they have amongst themselves. These guys, some of them are the brightest people you've ever met. Some of them have not focused on some of those things. I mean, you just have this very diverse mindset within a locker room, and I think it's it was made clear to me by one of the founders of the league to not get caught up in that idea that there's this one sort of monolithic viewpoint in the locker room. I think diversity is an important issue to the players. I think it's important that there is some level that their bosses have some experiences that are similar to them, whether that's based on race or something else. So, I think those are important issues to them, but there's no monolithic viewpoint in the locker room.
Lines are short, they're open. Go ahead.
Hi, Dee and Jim. It's nice to see you both. Jim, I remember having this conversation with you on the sideline at a Gilmore game. I'm concerned that football is a dying sport. When we were growing up, Catholic schools, my growing up, every school had at least one team. Some schools had two. Now it takes 3, 4, 5 parishes to field one 8th grade team. Is that a concern, and how are you both, and as owners, how are you dealing with this issue?
I think sports engages students, like music, art, sports engage students, so it's really important that athletics are part of a program within a school. And we've worked really hard on youth football. It fits what we do, because one of the reasons we do is we want to keep kids engaged and keep them in school, so it's not all self-serving about growing the sport. I think there are challenges in all the sports, because there's so many things for kids' time. I mean, you see, it's not just football, it's every sport that the kids are involved in a lot of different activities that are not, they have so many choices. There's so many choices, which is fantastic, because you want kids to be engaged and go to school. But I do think that football is extremely popular. And, 19 of the 20 top shows last year were football games, NFL football games. So when you think about the popularity, I think that sport is something that you have to continue to grow among youth, because there is so much demanding their time, so much going on. They're pulled in so many different directions. So we'll continue to, hopefully they pick football as someplace they want to spend their time, right?
Another piece of this that I think is important is that, football is, in my mind, the greatest game, and certainly the greatest team game there is. When you look at the net sports, hockey, basketball, soccer, everyone's basically doing the same thing. There's an intricacy in football where you have, you have offensive linemen, you have receivers, you have running backs, obviously you have quarterbacks. The defense, you basically have 3 different positions. And for these folks to learn teamwork under those intricacies in that complex situation it's just a better way to learn how to work on a team than any other sport. So I think, that is a value that kids play football get an understanding of how to do that in a very meaningful way.
I think also he didn't mention it, but the idea that there's so many moms that don't want their boys to play until they're bigger than we are, rather than the Pee-wee leagues. Is that the concern, that when kids are starting so late, they don't become great college players and then don't become great NFL players?
Well, I think Dee really addressed this. I think that, look, there's always going to be need for improvement, but we and especially under Commissioner Goodell, who gets some criticism, the NFL has led the way in safety for all sports for the last 10 years, and there has been significant advancements both in health, in technology, as well as awareness of it.
Yeah, we've developed a rookie tackle, and that's to continue flag football a little bit longer. It's kind of a modified football, and we're growing it around the country. It's a fantastic program, so mothers feel better about it, and it helps the kids learn the safety of the game, and it's important for them to learn how to tackle correctly.
Good point. Yes.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Dee. Thanks so much for being here. I actually just wanted to ask a question in terms of the Rooney Rule and kind of the evolution of the game, thinking long term. And Jim, you won't be surprised being in the first co-ed class at an all-boys school. And kind of standing up for Sarah, well, it's a different debate on soccer, but the question is, with Carly Lloyd's field goal and evolving the evolution of the Rooney Rule and the teams, can either of you comment in terms of when in the future, if ever in the future, you see women entering the game?
So I'll address the Carly Lloyd, and then I'll let Dee speak to the larger issue. But there's no question in my mind that if Carly Lloyd can, kick field goals in from 50 yards out, she's going to get an opportunity. You see too many teams losing, with kicks at the end of the game. If she can put it through the uprights, I think she'll get an opportunity.
I agree. I think if there's somebody that can play, and they'll get an opportunity.
Thank you.
We have another question from Twitter. What are the 3 core elements that you want to see as cultural components of your team?
Could be an essay question.
Yeah, that.
I wrote an essay on it.
Yeah, you can start on that one then.
Sure. So, I think what my father did was he always played the long game. He looked as far down the horizon as you can and tried to make decisions based on, how far you go down. So patience is part of that long game. He always talked about, everyone I talked to talked about do the right thing. And what he meant by that, how these folks define that is that, do you feel good about the decision you made after you made it? Not that you feel selfish, not that you got something out of it, but you really feel like you did something well and that you contributed in some way. And then the third was he was, really good at balancing. It sort of is what he described the people from Pittsburgh and Cleveland as toughness and kindness. My father was very, very competent. He had great vision. He was a good decision maker. Everything you would want in a boss, but he also, and these weren't compartmentalized, he also was able to really balance that with appreciation for everyone involved. So when the Steelers are at our best, those 3 elements are in our culture.
Mm-hmm. And I would just repeat that it's team is really important. There's no I in team. It's about working together as a team becomes very important in any organization, but definitely on the football field.
Hi, Dee. Hi. This is a question for you, Dee. It strikes me that NFL ownership is, franchise ownership is really different than other businesses. There is, at the end of the day, there's, as you alluded to earlier, there's, you're not deciding whether or not to run Chubb. You're staying out of those decisions, and there's so much that you don't control. And I just wanted to invite the two of you to reflect on that a little bit, how owning an NFL franchise and doing this work is really different than other kinds of work, than producing television shows, for instance.
Well, I would run Chubb, so.
We'd all be better off if we ran the ball more.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I think it's a balance. I mean, I think if you have any self-awareness, you know where you fit in and where your opinion matters. And it's very different running a team. Jimmy and I used to joke all the time that there's 32 different teams and they're great business partners, but they don't tell you anything about football. Jimmy called Mr. Rooney one day and he was getting ready to interview for a coach and he said, well, Dan, should I interview so-and-so? And he said, Jimmy, you ought to interview him. And then he asked him again, Dan, well, what about so-and-so? He said, well, you ought to interview him. And then he asked him another question and Jimmy said, Dan, you're not going to tell me one thing, are you? And of course he wasn't. And he valued his opinion more than anybody. That's the reason he called Dan Rooney to ask his opinion. And when it comes to the sport, where it's pretty much black and white, we talk about business, we don't talk about the sport much.
It's really interesting because we have our league meetings in March, and the experiences we have. I mean, Dee is being unbelievably kind today and helping me with this project. But this is unbelievably rare that someone would sit down because you feel an intensity in October, November, that in March, when the league meetings are, it is the most cordial. We all have fun together. It's this wonderful time, and they're almost Jekyll and Hyde experiences. So
yeah, it really is weird.
Yeah, very much.
You mentioned the book, Jim. Did you write it for someone in specific? Did you write it for Steelers fans, for Browns fans, for NFL fans? Who'd you target that to?
Well, we're hoping that folks who are interested in leadership will have interest in the book. We really try to tell a story about, we live in this world, and again, my father would not like me to be speaking or him to come across as holier than thou. He was not like that. But I also, I believe that he did this fantastic job of managing his influence. There's always a relationship between influence and power. And, you know, he was able to always come down, well, not always, but you know, he came down on the side of responsibility and accountability with that influence, and rarely got caught up in the trappings of success and power and those things. And I believe that's an important story to be told, and for someone to have had the success he had and to be able to give examples of that, that's really what I was hoping to do with the book.
Well, I, for one, enjoyed it. So, good. Tweet for us?
Another one from Twitter. What are you most proud of when you think of your charitable work in the community?
Well, Dee does so much, so she's looking at me to go first. So, you know, I mean, and Dee comes from a family business too. I mean, you know, my father, you know, he gets frustrated when our marketing folks come in and talk about, and they're doing a job, and they're doing a very important job, but talk about fans from a customer profile standpoint. My father grew up what is now about 200 yards from Heinz Field, and he always saw our fans as neighbors, and my grandfather, I think, felt that same way, and there was this fidelity in that relationship. So, you know, certainly things he did for the American Ireland Fund and that contribution to the peace process is something you'd point to. He was head of the United Way for America. That was something you'd point to. But I really think he would believe his biggest contribution was trying to make the Steelers reflect the people of Pittsburgh, and doing it over and over again in a way that they could feel good about who we were.
Yeah, that's great. I think several things we've worked on in the community. We're really excited about what we're doing in chronic absenteeism, because we do think if we can get kids to go to school, they're going to graduate and do well in life. So that's really important to us. You know, we work hard on youth football, and we're active in social justice issues too. It means a lot to our players, and so we work really hard there too. You know, we try to stay focused on education, because we do think everybody has a right to a great education, so we work hard there.
So that must be a big thing in Cleveland, because my son, who went to Gilmore Academy here in Cleveland, is a teacher in Denver now. So he's trying to live out that same ambition in Cleveland, and he talks about absenteeism and
right.
engaging with the children in 6th and 7th grade. So that's I'm glad that value is so important, and here's an example of someone taking it forward.
That's great.
We see so many things that the team does. It's one thing, I think, when the owner comes out and speaks to folks, but you want to get the players involved. If Baker walks in and starts speaking, a schoolroom is going to pay more attention, than if Dee walks in. You know, is it important to you that the players buy in to what management is preaching?
Well, not buy into what we're preaching. Buy in to being involved in the community, yes. It's critically important. It develops them as men. You know, so much has been given to them. There were coaches and teachers in their lives all the way up the ladder to get them to be NFL players. That didn't happen by accident. A lot of people put a lot of time into it. So we believe, and our players are these kind of young men, is they like to give back. They like to be out in the community. They're in the community as much as they can. And they have causes back in their homes too. I mean, they don't just do it here in Cleveland. They go back home and they get involved with the kids there too. I mean, a lot of the players are involved with kids. That's their cause. They have lots of different interests, but we support them in their cause. And chronic absenteeism is something that they care about too. So it works both ways.
Sure.
So I've had the pretty cool experience to be around a lot of players. And one of the most special moments in my life, I've gotten to know Jim Brown, who was the greatest football player to ever put on a jersey, bar none, and absolutely. And Jim talked about his work in prisons, and it was one of the most powerful conversations I've ever been in. My son, who I just mentioned, it was he and I and Jim Brown. And just the impact of that conversation and how invested he was with people, who obviously have, tremendous challenges and a whole bunch of difficulties that I can't even explain in such a short form. but the power and the investment and the intensity he had in that conversation, it just had a really big impact on me. And so Jim was one of my favorite guys to watch on films from before I was born, but that day he really transformed into a real hero for me.
That's cool. Yes, sir.
I thank you both for being here today for this great program. One of the hallmarks of the Steelers organization, of course, is continuity. One family ownership since 1932, 3 coaches in 50 years. Presumably that's important to the Steelers, continuity, and you see it exemplified. The Browns have not been so continuous, if you will, and they've had some challenges over the years, both with management and ownership and with coaching. And I was wondering, since today's program is about the culture of the organizations, the differences and maybe some similarities, if each of you could address respectively how continuity is important within your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, and how the challenges of lack of continuity within the organization impacts the culture of the organization itself.
So I'll start on this, Dee. So for 40 years, the Steelers were the worst team in football. And, in 1948, we had this, or 44, we combined with the Cardinals during the war. I think we threw 8 touchdown passes and 41 interceptions. Our best player quit football completely. Off the field, we had this, a little bit later, we had 1 car sponsorship, and the car couldn't go uphill, and we live in Pittsburgh, so my father had to drive past the drive that the stadium was on and put the car in reverse to go up the hill. So it took us 40 years to get to this point where you talk about this continuity. Dee and Jimmy have been at this, 6 years?
7.
So you still are 30-some years ahead of us, and I think you're going in the right direction. So continuity was certainly important to my father, but it took a long time to get to the point where you could establish it.
It's been hard. It's been a hard journey, and our results have not been what we would have hoped. But we're working really hard every day, and we strive to get better every day, and that's what we do.
Jim, as we wrap, if there's something you want people to take away from the book, from this hour, from the lessons learned in the NFL, what would that be?
Well, I think I tried to mention some of them, that you can be a good person and still win. I think that's the fundamental lesson. And then being in Cleveland, I love being back in Cleveland. As I said, I was here, for 3 formative years of my life. My brother Art, who's the team president, spent time here. My sister went to John Carroll, and my mother chose to send us to school in Cleveland because the people in Cleveland carry the same values that she certainly believes the people in Pittsburgh had, but this common decency, this uncommon integrity, and so it's just always a pleasure to be back here.
Mm-hmm. From growing up there and spending my adult life here, I always tell people that we really are the same city except for that AFC North problem.
That's it.
Is that the way you see it, that these cities are so intertwined that we need this rivalry? This should be the way the NFL works?
In a lot of cases, it is how the NFL works. I mean, you have this amazing rivalry, but people are really pretty much the same. And I think we're just a great example of Pittsburgh and Cleveland are a true example of even our country. I mean, we have differences, but at the end of the day, we're really a whole lot alike.
Mm-hmm. That is a good place to put it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here
Thank
as
you
well.
so much.
Today at the Westfield Studio Theater at the Idea Center at Playhouse Square, we've been listening to a special City Club forum with Cleveland Browns co-owner Dee Haslam and Jim Rooney, author of A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. Today's forum is part of our Authors in Conversation series, supported in part by the residents of Cuyahoga County through a public grant from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We are grateful to all of the residents of Cuyahoga County for their support through that public program. That brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Dee Haslam. Thank you, Jim Rooney. Thank you, members and friends of the City Club, with special thanks to our City Club members whose financial support makes our work possible. To find out more about the upcoming forums and how you can support the City Club, please visit us online at cityclub.org. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Well, they need more from Zeke than they got this past game. But I think prior to this last game, Zeke was on average, on pace for his career averages. He was on pace to be not quite the league's leading rusher as he was his rookie year and third year, but that was more because of the exceptional season that we're seeing from guys like Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey, and less about Zeke's production dropping off. You mentioned 87 yards per game. For his career, he's averaged just about 100, and going into this past weekend's game, he was in the low 90s. So we're talking about less than one first down a game off his averages. I think what they actually need is to believe in what Dak Prescott has shown us over the course of the season, which is whether it's because defenses are more concerned with Zeke, whether it's because he has his full complement of weapons, whether it's because Dak has just taken the next step as a passer, or all of the above, Brian, where the Cowboys, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but through 9 games, it's very obvious where they have been at their best is when Dak Prescott has been the focal point of the offense, when Dak Prescott has been the one that the offense runs through. Now, Zeke is still obviously one of the best pure runners in football. You don't go away from him, but you don't have such a dedication to him that you have a 2nd and 2 from the 11-yard line down 4 points in a game you got to have, and you decide this is the moment to feed Zeke, even though he's been struggling when Dak's playing one of the best games of his career up to that point. So what we've seen from Dak through 9 games is that statistically he's been one of the 8 best quarterbacks in the league. Zeke through 9 games, despite this past weekend's game, has been statistically one of the 6 or 7 best running backs in football. You need to marry those two, and assuming Zeke's Minnesota game was an outlier, that's the best path moving forward. But it's not just giving Zeke 35 carries like I maybe would have thought it was at the beginning of the season.
I think you're right. When you talk about this Dallas Cowboys team for the last 3 or 4 years, it's all about running the football, run down your throat, protect your quarterback. At this point, you don't have to protect Dak as much. Now you can get him involved in the game much more earlier. You're not dependent upon Zeke to run the football. But Zeke hasn't been bad. 5 out of the 9 games they played this season, he has over 100 yards. Yep. Really, when you look at the 4, the Giants game, first game of the year, blowout win. Then you look at New Orleans, Green Bay, Minnesota. Minnesota has a very good run defense. Guys that can run to the football across the board at the linebacker position. Tough team to run against. At the time when they played Green Bay and New Orleans, they had very good run defenses as well. And so he's not having a terrible year. I just think if this team wants to be special, you need more of Dak, less of Zeke, because you're dependent on him so much. Look at the way the defenses are playing you. They're saying we're going to put 8 or 9 guys in the box. That's why Dak has been so explosive down the field.
But you're not paying Ezekiel Elliott to be one of the 6 or 7 best running backs in the league. You paid Ezekiel Elliott dealing with the holdout, dealing with Cabo, dealing with all the PR, because you wanted him to be the best running back in the league. And the fact that you're even able to say, well, the way the Cowboys are great is if Dak is great is such a far cry from where we were when this season first started, when we just all assumed, because we knew that if this Cowboys team was going to be good, it was going to go through Ezekiel Elliott.
Well, I think what Brian said at the end there is very important. I think one of the reasons you paid Zeke is because of how much easier he makes Dak's job. And if you're from watching these games, teams, despite Dak's numbers, teams are still selling out, for the most part, to stop Ezekiel Elliott, and that's one of the reasons Dak's having the year that he is. And if Zeke this year's on pace for over 1,400 yards, rushing yards, if he can give you that, then he's worth the money. Like, he doesn't have to win the rushing title to be worth the money. If he is a guy who can be 90 yards per game rushing, moving forward with this contract, that is a great contract. It is a worthwhile contract because of his level of consistency that he's delivered. I think you make a really good point, Brian, twofold. One is, one of the reasons Zeke's numbers are slightly down is week one, when it was a blowout, when he didn't have the training camp, when he was clearly going to be on a pitch count. But the other one is, to me, the more concerning one for Dallas, which is, you mentioned New Orleans, you mentioned Green Bay, you mentioned Minnesota. Now, were Zeke's numbers down in those games because they were down big against Green Bay? Because they weren't down big against New Orleans. They weren't down big against Minnesota, except for in the early going. Or were his numbers down because those are playoff-caliber teams with playoff-caliber defenses, and thus far this season, Zeke has not been effective against those guys?
Well, we talk about the playoffs and you talk about playoff-caliber teams. This is what you have to have. You have to have your offensive line winning in the trenches. And really, when you look at the defensive line as well as the offensive line for the Cowboys, this past couple weeks, they haven't played great. They've been average. That offensive line looks kind of slow. They're not getting up to the second level, blocking the linebackers. They're making it very hard on Zeke to run the football. Yeah, here's the other part to this. If you want to win in the playoffs, November, December, remember what Jerry Jones said at the beginning of the season. We need Zeke for the playoffs. This is when he's going to earn his money. That big contract that he just got, the playoffs, the ability to run the football and stop the run, that's going to be huge. That's when you need Zeke the most.
The other thing you have to factor in, Nick, is that this Cowboys team finds themselves down in almost every game. And you're not going to really rely on that run game when you are playing catch-up in the first half of almost every game this season.
Well, that to me is more on coaching than anything else. New Orleans, 3 points in the first half. Green Bay down 31-3. The Jets down 21-3. Played really well against Philadelphia. Then the Giants, same old story, down 12-3 late in the first half there, even though they ended up winning that game easily. And then this past week down 14-0. Slow starts for the vast majority of your season. Slow starts against every team with a pulse that you've played except for the Philadelphia Eagles. That's unacceptable. But one other point on this that is, to me, more concerning and less about the 2019 Cowboys and more about the Cowboys basically every year other than Dak and Zeke's rookie seasons. Their ineffectiveness and Zeke's inability to be great in short yardage and red zone situations is incredibly concerning. Going into the year, I said the number for Zeke that I want to see is the touchdown number. Could he have a 20-touchdown season? Because last year they were so bad inside the 10 and inside the 5-yard line. Zeke, his rookie season, had 16 touchdowns. Once again this year, you saw the Cowboys, hell, in the Vikings game, the drive before they ended up not picking up the fourth down, they get inside the 10 and they settle for a field goal. They get inside the 20 on the final drive, and it stalls out. Zeke's got to be better in those short yardage spots, and the team's got to put him in a better position in those short yardage spots.
Those short yardage spots are critical to winning football, and they were the best in the league at short yardage running coming into the season. The big difference is, again, that offensive line has not been together for a long time, all season long. You miss time with Smith. You miss time with Collins on both the tackles positions. Those are critical positions. You talk about continuity for that offensive line. You have to get that run game going. Here's the other thing. For them to make the playoffs, I don't think Zeke has to be great. I think he has to be good. I think Dak has to be great. If they get great play out of Dak and good play out of Zeke, I think they can make the playoffs.
And for the Cowboys this year, if you just go over their offensive rankings, they're 6th in points, they're 1st in yards, they're 5th in rushing, they're 3rd in passing, they're 1st in third downs, they're 1st in sack percentage allowed, which is good. They're 17th in the red zone. Like, one of these things is not like the other.
Not adding up.
In every other category, this has been an elite offense, except for at the most critical moments when they are settling for far too many Brett Maher field goals. We know he can hit from 60. Unfortunately, he's had to hit from 28 a bunch, and that's no good for any offense.
Bottom line is, Jerry Jones thinks that this team could run the ball more effectively, which means it's going to be something that they're probably going to address moving forward.
And I do wonder if Jason Garrett knew that. And if that had to do with Jason Garrett calling Zeke's number on second down, on third down, is knowing that, well, my boss always says this is the guy we've got to run through. And if they hadn't run through him, they might be sitting here at 7-3.
Especially the way Dak was playing in that game.
Or 6-3, pardon me.
All right. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.
He is, and it is delightful to watch. Year 17, let's try something new. Listen, he has played the point as a point forward and the orchestrator of offenses throughout his career. Like, let's not, no, even he play with Kyrie, it doesn't matter. Like, he still is the guy that's orchestrating things. But this year, if you've been watching the games, and I know, Vinny, you've watched all of them, I've watched all of them, I know you've watched most of them, it's different. He is truly playing point guard. He is deferring more than I've ever seen him defer, especially early in basketball games. His field goal attempts are down, and part of that might be because right now his shot is a little off. He's shooting like 31% from three, but he is doing what the best point guards in the league do, which is not only running the offense and controlling the offense, but finding the guys that need to get the ball in rhythm. Finding the guys, okay, Kuz just came into the game. He's had a rough start to the year. Let me find him, get him involved. Avery Bradley hasn't gotten a shot yet. Let me set something up for him. Danny Green is posted up in the corner as he loves to be. Let me draw the defense and kick to him. I don't know the argument to be made right now through 10 games that he hasn't been the best point guard in the league. Now, I don't consider, just so we're on the same page here, I don't consider Harden the point guard. Okay. Agreed? Like, I mean, I understand he has been but they got Chris Paul to play point. Russ plays point. So let's remove Harden from the discussion. LeBron's clearly been the best point guard. He's leading the league in assists, and his team's got the best record. And it's been very fun to watch because I actually think when LeBron's in year 20, that's going to be his full-time position. I don't think it's all of a sudden he's going to go down on the post. I think he's going to go more further away from the basket because that court vision in the passing is never going to go away even as the athleticism wanes. So, yes, of course, clearly he's been the best point guard in basketball.
I think he's like a reverse Magic, basically, where Magic started off being more point guard and his career went down. And basically when he came back in 96, he was a point forward. And when he took the Lakers to the finals in 91, that slow-down team, that's what I compare this version of LeBron to, is the master orchestrator, basically playing the game at his own pace because he can't play that fast pace anymore. So the best way to control the pace is to be the guy bringing the ball off the court and to make sure that we're getting into our sets early as opposed to initiating it from that position. But, Nick, no. I'm not going to say he's the best point guard in basketball right now. Look.
So who is?
Look, and I won't even say that you're wrong, but I will enter two names into the discussion. Luka Doncic is playing excellent basketball right now.
I love him so much.
He's nearly averaging a triple-double, 28, 10, and 9. Yep. Okay? For a Dallas Mavericks team that does not have Anthony Davis, that has Kristaps Porzingis playing
poorly,
very poorly,
and
that team is nowhere near what we thought they were going to be from a talent standpoint. He's carrying them. Now, I don't know exactly how much greater he can be than what he is right now. I think he's pretty much the closest thing to a polished,
he don't have to be that much better to be an MVP candidate.
Exactly. Look, 30, 10, and 10 is pretty damn impressive in itself. And a second guy that I'm going to bring up, his team is playing under 500 right now, but Damian Lillard averaging 32, 6, and 5 for a Portland Trailblazers team that's a little underachieving right now, Nick. You cannot dismiss that type of game.
Listen, Luka he's my adopted Slovenian son. I love him so much.
So wait, like you are my adopted basketball son.
Exactly.
Okay, so
right,
Jenna, you asked me if I have kids.
It's just
There's
me.
one.
Just me. I think I might be older than Vinny, but it's just me. I love Luka. There was once upon a time I was sending you Luka Doncic videos 3 years ago when he was playing as a 16-year-old in
grainy old
He's unbelievable. I love him. And Lillard continues to be one of the more underrated players in the league. And by the way, the guy who Luka was traded for, Trae Young, is having one hell of a season. However, here's what is not going to happen. What's not going to happen is, for the better part of 5 years, LeBron's whole time in Cleveland and his first year with the Lakers, no matter how overwhelming his offensive numbers were, if people wanted to discredit him, what did they say? Well, what about that defense? Even though he was still one of the best on-ball defenders in the world every year, well, his off-ball defense and the team defense. What's not going to happen is now, when the Lakers are the best defense in basketball, when LeBron, according to the nerdy advanced defensive stats, is a top 5 defender at his position or any position, top 5 defender in the league, that we are going to include Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard, or the guy I brought up, Trae Young. Because Luka is a minus defender. Dame is a minus defender. Trae will always be a minus defender. Not his fault.
And LeBron is a minus shooter, and all of those other guys aren't. LeBron is shooting 27% between 16 feet and out. That is not good. When he was at his height in Miami, he shot 45% from 16 feet. Now, that's the free throw line and out. He is basically, at this point, more of a finisher on the inside, even though he's operating the offense from the outside.
Right, but
to be in this game, Nick, this game is a shooting game now. You have to be able to shoot, and LeBron is not a plus shooter anymore. That is what I'll give you.
Listen, I feel like you are getting a little ahead of yourself saying LeBron's not a plus shooter anymore. He has not been a plus shooter thus far this season. And if you think it's going to stay like that the rest of the year, maybe off the air we can make a little wager about what the percentages will land at, because right now he's at 31% from 3. Here's guessing he ends closer to 35% from 3. Now, the thing I thought you were going to bring up was the free throws. And last night, the free throws all of a sudden reared their ugly head again in a game that was nip and tuck throughout, and he has to get those at least partially right. But there is not, if we are being honest, the Mavericks or the Blazers, if they had the opportunity for this season to flip out at point guard LeBron James for Luka or LeBron James for Dame, they would do that in a heartbeat. Year 17, 56,000 minutes or not.
It's a lot of work, though, for LeBron James. Is that sustainable? Do you think he can do that? Are the Lakers asking him to do too much every